lies to us, and you guys don't hunt him down and interview him again, and you don't charge him with a crime. Now, here's the good news. Here's the good news. The president was falsely accused of conspiracy. The FBI does a 10-month investigation. And James Comey, when we deposed him a year ago, told us at that point they had nothing. You do a 22-month investigation. At the end of that 22 months, you find no conspiracy. And what's the Democrats want to do? They want to keep investigating. They want to keep going. Maybe a better course of action is to figure out how the false accusation started. Maybe it's to go back and actually figure out why Joseph Nipson was lying to the FBI. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. That's exactly what Bill Barr's doing. And thank goodness for that. That's exactly what the Attorney General and John Durham are doing. They're going to find out why we went through this three-year saga and get to the bottom of it.
Time of the gentleman has expired. In a moment, we will take a very brief 5-minute break. First, I ask everyone in the room to please remain seated and quiet while the witness exits the room. I also want to announce to those in the audience that you may not be guaranteed your seat if you leave the hearing room at this time.
And there we have it after about the first hour and a half of Robert Mueller's testimony to the House Judiciary Committee. That's just about halfway through. They're going to take a quick 5-minute break. I want to start with Mary Bruce, our congressional correspondent up there on Capitol Hill. Mary, we saw two very different strategies at play there by the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats might have wanted to bring Robert Mueller's report to life. They basically did that by reading it and having him say yes or no, that's what I wrote. The Republicans raising questions about the entire approach of Robert Mueller.
Yeah, George, and these strategies were very clear straight out the gate. We saw the chairman, Gerald Nadler, his first line of questioning was to get Robert Mueller to say that no, his report did not exonerate the president. Then very clearly, we saw Democrats trying to tick through those 10 incidents of possible obstruction, to get Mueller to detail them for the American people, again, to underscore that his report did not exonerate the president, as he so often has claimed. Republicans, on the flip side, are clearly trying to put to bed the questions about the issue of collusion, picking apart the language of the report to highlight that there was no criminal conspiracy, and then going through a series of questions trying to essentially discredit the investigation. George, both sides knew that Robert Mueller is known for giving these very brief, often one-word answers. They came prepared for that. They tried to take advantage of that. It felt like a hearing by rapid fire, often at a lot of points with Mueller just ticking through all of these different questions. The question now is whether it's resonating with the American people.
That is one of the big questions to David Muir, also at the Capitol. At times, it did appear that Robert Mueller was having trouble following the questioning.
It did appear that way, which is probably why he wanted his deputy chief of staff there right by his side. That request in the last week or so that made a lot of news in the last 24 hours, to have him sitting beside him to help him point directly to the page numbers in that report that were continually being cited by both Democrats and Republicans. You heard Robert Mueller repeatedly say very one-word answers pointing right back to the report, particularly on the Democratic side of the questioning when they were trying to press on those points that Mary just mentioned on the potential examples of obstruction of justice. Mueller repeatedly said, I turn back to the report, and then the Democrats would simply read from Mueller's report for him. There had been a lot of questions about whether or not we would hear Robert Mueller reading portions of that report, and it would appear, at least so far today, that lawmakers in choosing to read it are reading it for him. But again, to go back to those two key points that Mary mentioned, the questioning that said, did you totally exonerate the president? Mueller saying no on that. And then that tense back and forth a moment ago on the Democratic side about Don McGahn, the president's lawyer, who obviously was mentioned a multitude of times in the Mueller report, a series of back and forth questions on whether or not Don McGahn had been told to lie about that public narrative, and Mueller repeatedly pointing back to the Mueller report.
Yeah, and that gets to a key question on the follow-on here. Dan Abrams, let me start with you right here. It does seem like the Democrats are trying to basically create kind of a written record in this hearing that would lay the predicate for going forward with impeachment proceedings. And Don McGahn now appears to be a key witness. You've had the president calling him a liar, Robert Mueller calling him a credible witness.
Yeah, you need to hear from Don McGahn now. That's the key. Because, look, from the Democratic perspective, to me so far, it's been a bit of a bust. I mean, they needed this to come to life. They needed to be able to tell that story you're talking about. And this hasn't felt like a story. And on the flip side of it, Robert Mueller has not been defending himself against allegations that there were 12 plus angry people who were out to get Donald Trump on his team. He started by talking about the integrity of the team, but then when there are accusations being made, he's not defending them at all. He's not defending why they wrote Section 2. He's not defending the integrity. He's not even properly answering the question about the FBI job.
Let me take that to Chris Christie. That was a bit of a surprise to me as well. It does seem that Robert Mueller is very conscious one of the time. He is taking in not wanting to say one word more than he has to at any moment.
This is what I said to you before it all started. My experience with Bob Mueller, having worked with him professionally for 7 years, was that when we would get in a room with a group of people where you were having a collegial conversation, Bob Mueller was always the person who said the least and was always the most careful. And I think you're seeing that again this morning. I think also the Democrats have left a lot of opportunities on the table here, George. You know, Congressman Ratcliffe, I think, made some significant points about the fact that we as prosecutors don't exonerate people. We either indict or we don't indict.
Although the special counsel regulations do say that the special counsel is supposed to write a report about that, which is what he did.
Right, but the point, though, George, is that the Democrats then didn't follow up on that to say, did you intend for us to do this since you felt you could not? And I think that's the biggest mistake the Democrats have made so far.
It certainly seems to be right now the biggest unanswered question on the table. Is that what Robert Mueller intended? He didn't want to take the bait on Barr either. We'll see if he can answer it.
He can't answer it if they don't ask it.
Let's take it. I want to take it to John Carl also. You know, we have not heard from the president since the hearing began. John, do you have any more reporting on the White House reaction?
Well, we're told the president has been watching, and a person very close to the president who has spoken to him this morning tells us, quote, this is a zero for the Democrats. So the president has not been tweeting. He has been watching, and they clearly think that the Democrats have not done what they intended to do here. And, George, this is not the moment that Democrats had been expecting. They expected this to be a dramatic culmination, hearing directly from the special counsel. And as you've seen, you've heard a lot of one-word answers, a lot of apparent confusion from Robert Mueller. Not the moment they hoped for. There was, though, George, a moment of clarity, I thought, in the beginning with the questioning from Jerry Nadler on the question of whether or not Mueller wanted to interview President Trump. We reported along the way that he tried very hard, and he was very clear in his questions Q&A with Nadler that effort went on throughout the investigation, and that he felt that an interview with the president was vital to the investigation, and he never got that interview. I found that especially interesting because the president told me directly on more than one occasion that he fully intended and was willing to be interviewed under oath by the special counsel. It obviously never happened.
Yeah, his team fought it every step of the way. Pierre Thomas, you've covered Robert Mueller a long time as well. You covered the Justice Department as well. We know that Robert Mueller was a reluctant witness today. He fought over the restrictions. He fought over the timing. He didn't want to appear. He said his testimony, his report is the testimony. And it did appear there were even some questions from Republicans raised how involved he was in the overall preparation of the report and the investigation itself.
That's right, George. Mueller is not a made-for-television person, and you're seeing that play out today. He's extremely, as Governor Christie has said, extremely careful in how he approaches these types of things. He's trying to stay within the report, but he's trying to defend the conclusions of the report by basically agreeing with the Democrats where he sees fit. And in terms of some of the attacks by the Republicans, he seems to be perfectly content to ignore them. But I think the thing that he's been most animated about is trying to make this point that what the Russians did in terms of attacking the election was sweeping and systematic.
And as we're talking, we just got a tweet from President Trump, Cecilia Vega. He's retweeting Chris Wallace of Fox News saying this has been a disaster for the Democrats. So you see the president is willing to weigh in right now at the halfway mark.
Yeah, and quarterbacking a little bit and watching, even though he said he would be watching a little bit. We'll remind our viewers the president has a very light schedule today. He's in Washington. He's got a pretty open, at least public schedule, so we expect him to be watching this. Look, we heard the preview attack lines coming out of the White House and from aides inside. They said that that the Democrats want a do-over of the do-over of the do-over. And we're going to hear that throughout the course of the day from the White House. But, we have to go back to, I think, Mueller's opening statement. He came out swinging in a way. He contradicted what the president has been saying all along, the crux of his argument that he was totally exonerated. And Mueller said, no. I mean, there may not be giant bombshells or revelations after that, but hearing the special counsel for the first time on the record come out with those words and say the president of the United States was not exonerated by this investigation is big news.
I did not reach the conclusions of no collusion or no obstruction, which is what the president had tweeted. That gets to the question, Kate Shaw, then, of one of the things the Republicans were trying to do, particularly Congressman Ratcliffe, is basically say that this is not a case that could be prosecuted. Robert Mueller concedes that. He says, I didn't even look at that. The question for the Democrats now is it a case that Robert Mueller intended for Congress to pursue during an impeachment proceeding? It seemed like they got to the edge of that questioning, didn't ask it.
Yeah, and the Democrats didn't really step in and sort of pick up those lines of questioning. So Mueller sort of says, well, this is a unique situation in response to one of the questions, and it's unique because he didn't have available the option of actually indicting the president. And so, with essentially leaving open the question, the next sort of natural line is, and so, the report discusses other constitutional mechanisms for addressing presidential misconduct. Well, what are those mechanisms? And clearly, the report is contemplating or referring to impeachment. It's referenced in a footnote, but not in the body of the report. They need to ask, and I think that that's factually within the report. It's in a footnote, but it's there, so it stays within the confines of the report to say impeachment. Now, will he weigh in substantively on whether this is impeachable conduct? I doubt it, but I think that they should try.
Terry, we've seen a lot of hearings like this in the past. Obviously the Watergate hearings, the Iran-Contra hearings, and at the beginning of the Watergate hearings, quite partisan. They kind of shifted over time, but this one does seem remarkable. There doesn't seem to be anyone on either side who's going to move 1 inch from the party line.
That's right. So what you have is a storytelling competition. You've got this mess of facts that the country's kind of confused about, and the Democrats came in with this very difficult challenge: tell a new story to the American public about something they think they already know. And I don't see a game.
Well, a news story, even though it is the story contained inside the report. Gerald Nadler's back in the podium.